Thank you everyone for logging into our webinar. I'm going to do a little housekeeping before we get started. Those of you who are logged in on Zoom, we have a Q&A button on your screen where you can submit questions. And if you're on Facebook, then you can leave it in the comments and I will keep tabs on those. And when we get to the Q&A section, then I'll read those off for Mr. Stover. So. Let's get going. A little bit of our program and special guest. Matthew Stover is a New York Times bestselling author of several Star Wars books, including Shatterpoint, as well as the Acts of Cain series. As a fellow native of Danville, Illinois, I am very happy to welcome him today. Thank you so much for being here virtually with us, Matt. On to you.
Thanks for having me. Are we ready to go?
We're live. Go for it.
Terrific. When the library inquired if I might be interested in participating in their month-long event, I tried to think of something that I could usefully talk about for an hour or so, and writing commercial fiction is basically the only thing that I really know much about. So what I'm going to try to do here today is talk about some of the techniques that I use, some of the sort of basic principles that I use to create commercial fiction, in my case, novels. The information, the concepts that I'm going to be talking about may be less useful for those of you who are mainly interested in writing short stories, because that's not something I'm really known for, and I would hesitate to give advice on that particular subject. So it's going to mostly apply to longer form fiction, like the stuff that I do. And my standard disclaimer here is that this is just the way I do things. That's not to say that it's what I think you should do. What I think you should do actually is take anything you find useful from this and apply it, and just ignore the rest. So that being said, I guess let me just start at the beginning. I have a few pages of an outline that I'm going to refer to every once in a while, and it's broken up into sections. And this section, section 1, I call the rules. And these are the rules of writing commercial fiction as I understand them. Rule 1 is never bore your audience. It's just that simple. You can get away with almost anything except being dull. And part of what I'm going to talk about today, is some of the ways that you can hope to avoid boring your audience. But the important thing to remember is that that's rule 1. Rule 2 is there is no rule 2. If you're ever in doubt, see rule 1. Your focus has to be on engaging your audience, especially their imagination, and keeping them turning pages. That's what editors are looking for when they're deciding whether or not they want to invest in your book to help make money for their publisher. What I'm trying to offer here is, as my sister Martha likes to say, these are tools, not rules. At most, they're guidelines, and you should always feel free to color outside them if that's what you need to do. The third rule is that I think you shouldn't pay too much attention to market research and what's currently popular, because for one simple reason, which is that by the time you finish your book, what's currently popular will have moved on to something else. So the important thing, I'm not saying don't do the market research. I'm saying that if you look at a trend and something about that trend sings to you and makes you really, really want to participate in writing that kind of story, then by all means go for it. Because the important thing is to focus on stories that thrill you. You have to just trust that whatever thrills you is also going to thrill other people. And really, whatever the specifics of that might be isn't really important. Doesn't matter how freaky you think your interests are. It's worth noting that 200 years after his death, the Marquis de Sade is still in print. Very successful writer from that standpoint, even though you might say he wrote for a niche audience. Let's see. Moving on to section 2. Section 2, I just call conception. It has to do with developing the ideas, developing an idea into a story. And I'm not gonna linger too long on this specific thing because ideas just actually aren't as important as most people think they are. Premise, a good premise for a story or a book can get the attention of an agent or an editor, but that's the most you can hope for out of your premise. The important thing is your execution of a premise, because let me put it this way. A great premise can't survive crummy execution. Great execution can rescue a crummy premise. So what I think that you need to focus on is how you tell the story and how you present the characters and the situations and things like that. You can take what is deeply cliched, whatever premise suits you, whether it is wildly original or teen heartbreak trying to get a date for the big dance. It doesn't matter. What matters is how you tell the story. And so moving on, the important thing to remember when you're creating a story for commercial consumption is that the scenario, that is to say the idea of the plot that you're talking about, and scenario and character are actually kind of two faces of the same coin. You need to, if the scenario is what triggered your original idea, you need to design a character or characters that are going to be challenged by that scenario, that are going to be knocked out of their everyday existence and have to put forth some sort of extraordinary effort to achieve whatever goals they desire. If the characters are where you're starting, you should be designing your scenario for to challenge those characters. So, right, scenario, design characters that'll be challenged by it. Characters, design a scenario that will challenge your characters. Because what's really important in terms of selling a story, in my opinion, is struggle. it's the effort that your characters put out to achieve their goals. I think that that's what people respond to more than details of biography of your character, whatever traumas they have suffered, things like that. What people want to see, and editors in particular want to see, is a character who is working hard, who is moving out of the comfort zone of their life to do something extraordinary. So in that vein, I have a slogan. I have a couple of slogans here, but this particular slogan is "Forget conflict." Conflict is not important except as it feeds into the character's struggle. And it doesn't just have to be your protagonist's struggle. Every character, as Kurt Vonnegut memorably put it, every character has to want something in every scene, even if it's only a glass of water. So plot, which we're getting into now, section 3, character and plot. Plotting is really about the interaction of the actions, the things that the characters do. It's very important when you're trying to sell commercial property to have your characters be active. They have to, it's vital that they do things, even if their doing things don't work out for them. It's how can I put this? Okay, there are 3 questions, the 3 main questions that I always need to answer about every character in one of my stories are: what does this character want? What can this character do to get it? And what's stopping them from getting it? Once you understand all 3 of these things, you can move your characters forward. Your characters, I should say, can move themselves forward. They can pursue their goals, and their pursuit of their goals and the attendant consequences of the actions they undertake to achieve their goals is what creates the plot. I should point out that when I say what do they want, what will they do to get it, and what's in their way, I should point out that the will in that formulation, the what will they do to get it, it's carrying a lot of water, because it doesn't just mean their capability. It doesn't mean it's not limited to physical or intellectual capacity. It also reflects what they are psychologically and emotionally, socially capable of doing. So everyone, real life and fictional, is constrained by a variety of forces that they can either fight against, try to overcome, or try to circumvent to get what you want. It's also vital to understanding your characters to understand what tactics they're comfortable with, whether they are personal active action hero types, or contemplative armchair detective types, or middle-aged English professor at a small liberal arts college, concerned with office politics and making sure that he gets tenure. You have to understand that the character's biography is what governs to some degree what their options are. Character's biography, the scenario, the environment, all that stuff governs the options, but you need to know what you think they're ready and willing to do. And then you need to push them to do things that they're not ready and willing to do, because it's moving them out of their comfortable everyday existence is basically where the story begins. There's a fairly famous quote in my particular field, science fiction and fantasy, that unfortunately I forgot to look up before I started this the session today. So I can't remember if it's Ursula Guin or Marion Zimmer Bradley, but one of them, I'm sure, said that that your story, at the beginning of your story, your character is in a bear trap. The adventure, the fun of the story is watching them struggle to get out. Now, being in a bear trap, that's obviously just a metaphor. A lot of times the protagonist doesn't understand that they're in a bear trap until they start trying to do things and find the other constraints that are stopping them. I mean, Luke Skywalker doesn't know that his father was Anakin Skywalker, the chosen one, at the beginning of episode 4. The people who buy a haunted house don't know it's haunted when they first move in. They're in the trap, but they don't know that they're in a trap. Finding out about the trap is usually a substantial part of the first act of the story. When I say first act, I should mention that I am a particular aficionado of a 3-act structure. It's the way a lot of television shows are structured, a lot of movies are structured, and a lot of plays. My own background is in the theater. And roughly speaking, in broad outline, the first act introduces the characters and the problems they face, and delineates their goals, their objectives, their hopes, dreams, whatever. And usually includes the first moves that they make to try to achieve their goals. The second act is where everything gets complicated by the pushback, whether it is from antagonists or from society generally, or from the environment, in a disaster survival movie kind of scenario. The second act is where things get complicated, more and more complicated, until at the end of the second act, it's very clear that your protagonist cannot possibly achieve their goals. They can't win. They can't survive. They can't get a date. They can't stop the love of their life from marrying the wrong guy. The end of Act 2 is usually the sort of lowest point, where they have to do something desperate. And then Act 3, their desperation is not rewarded, makes things worse till there is no hope for them at all. until the end, when they either win if you choose for them to win, or they lose or are destroyed if you're into downer endings, or if their goals are something that deserve to fail. A famous example of that is like Day of the Jackal, where the actual protagonist is an assassin planning, and you watch him planning the perfect assassination of Charles de Gaulle. And so you get invested in him, watching him struggle to pull this off. But you also get invested in the cops that are trying to stop him. And at the end, yeah, he fails and dies. Sorry, it's a spoiler. De Gaulle lives. He is not assassinated in this book. Oh, right. The other point about the bear trap, the reason I like that image is because it's painful, and there is that gives your heroes an urgency to what they're doing. In other words, they have to move, because where they are hurts too much. Of course, there's worse for them down the road as they try to escape whatever. I'll get in a little bit of that in a later section about rising action. But urgency is, I wouldn't say it's an essential element, but it's really, really useful in gathering suspense, getting your audience invested in what's happening, and also persuading an editor that people are going to enjoy this book. People, especially in the kind of books that I write, which is really action adventure kind of stuff, they like seeing people in desperate circumstances doing desperate things to try to survive or triumph. Let's see where we are now. Oh, and the only other thing I wanted to say about urgency is, in addition to the urgency of being driven by desire or pain or hunger or whatever, just like a technical thing that is extraordinarily useful is a deadline. A deadline of some variety. It doesn't have to be like an end of the world deadline, but the big dance is a deadline. The wedding is a deadline. When the chairman of the board makes the decisions is going to make the decision about the promotions, it's a deadline. In my third novel, I set a deadline of 7 days, at the end of which the love of the hero's life is going to die a horrible death unless he intervenes and saves her. And that, so a deadline, it can be just a useful technical feature to sort of not only add suspense, but also motivate sort of increasing desperation and more extreme efforts on the part of your protagonist. Whenever possible in your story, you should give your protagonist the initiative. Ideally, you want your protagonist to drive the plot, because it's really about, the story is about what your protagonist does and what happens as a consequence of what your protagonist does. And so your protagonist has to do things. And it is generally useful. It's the way I always try to set things up. I find it it's more often than not, successful novels in any genre depend on the protagonist making the moves. The antagonist, whether it's actual villains or society, the environment, whatever, reacts to those moves. There are consequences of those moves. Things go badly until they go well. Protagonists who are helplessly buffeted by events are really the bane of editors everywhere. A lot of people feel that is a more honest kind of story because they feel out of control in their own lives and see that most people seem to live at the mercy of external factors. But one of the main complaints, the main things that gets a book rejected from a commercial publisher is a protagonist who does not protag. If they're not making moves, if they're not out there trying, the audience's, the reader's sympathies are going to shift to whoever is trying. And that's usually the bad guys. Let's see. The last note on structuring your plot around your characters, which you really have to do, is try not to force us as readers to watch your protagonist flail around, suffer traumatic indecision, for example. I know Shakespeare got away with it famously in Hamlet, but that's because he was Shakespeare. You are not Shakespeare, neither am I. Again, all rules are rules of thumb. If you think you can make it work, if it's not boring, you win. But generally speaking, it is just better to let your protagonist make the smartest choice they have available to them. And when I say available, I mean a person's choices are going to be constrained by their circumstances, their background, their resources, their psychology, their moral convictions. But given all that, you take all that and you figure out what the best move for that person, given all those things, their best move, their smartest move, the highest chance of success. And they do that first. They do it every time. In every crisis, they do the smartest thing that they can think of. And then their situation gets worse anyway. This is critical to the sense of rising action that I'm going to talk about here in a minute. But the point is that you really don't want your reader saying, come on, you idiot, don't go there. It's obvious you need to go over there. So what you do is you have your protagonist go over there where everyone knows they need to go and have that turn out to make things worse because of pushback from antagonists opponents, society, unforeseen consequences, weird whatever in the environment, in a survival narrative, or the movement of armies that are beyond your control, or whatever. It doesn't really matter. Point is, let them do the smart thing and have it not help them. This goes to one of the other slogans that that I was talking about earlier. One of my slogans is, good luck is only for bad guys. In other words, you can't cheat. You can, but it's generally a bad idea to cheat by letting your protagonist get lucky, have things break their way. What you want is for your protagonist to earn their victory at every turn, that everything they do contributes to their eventual triumph and or defeat in the downer version. So, but if you want to have luck play a role in your story, that's fine, but it's always the bad guys who get lucky. It's sort of a villain bonus, I guess you could say. Things break the bad guy's way, and the protagonist has to deal with their good luck, his or their bad luck. So good luck is for bad guys. So roughly speaking, the pattern of rising action that I stick to in my books is the protagonist makes a smart move. This smart move, for whatever reason, leads to an unfortunate outcome. So the protagonist makes a riskier move, something that takes them further out of their comfort zone. And that generates an even worse outcome. And so now your protagonist, in desperation, does something insane, and the outcome is complete catastrophe, making it impossible for your protagonist to win until they do something that they would have thought is impossible. They make a move that changes them as a person, alters their society, whatever. It's something that they didn't think was possible for them. They find a way to make it possible, thus they win, or fail to do so and get destroyed. Brings us to section 4. And this is another one of my slogans, which is that you have to give the magic room to work. This observation is not original with me, but real magic does exist. Real magic is what we do. It is putting black marks on a white page or pixels on a computer screen, and through some bizarre transformative magic, those black marks create a story inside someone else's head. This happens through the power of your reader's imagination. Your reader's imagination is the most valuable ally you have as a writer. There is nothing more important than exciting their imagination, generating those pictures in their head, or inducing them to imagine themselves in the world that you're creating or the scenario that you're writing about. And so it's absolutely essential that you don't overpower your reader's imagination, that you don't try to muscle them and make them see what you want them to see, feel what you want them to feel. You have to sort of induce them. And one of the ways you do that one of the ways I do that, I should say, I think of myself as like a guide through the story. So I am walking along, metaphorically, I'm side by side with my reader. We're walking along and I'm pointing out the things that I think they need to see in order to understand what's going on the walk. The rest of the stuff, everything else in their view, is actually what they're creating in their heads as they read the words about what the stuff that I think is important. So I think you should only tell the minimum that you can tell to keep your story comprehensible and to have it, to give it the feel that you want it to have. You don't want to oversell, and you don't want to show it all at once. You don't want to give too much away. A lot of writers, even writers who are sometimes very successful, seem to be obsessed with foreshadowing and laying out clues, setting up things to be justified, later. And one of the smartest things I ever heard from any of my teachers was he asked me, "Why are you telling me this now?" I said, "Well, it's going to be important later." And he says, "Well, tell me later when it's important. Right now, you're just wasting my time. You're distracting me from what's going on right now because you're worried about what you're planning to have go on later. Let it happen. Let them discover just don't give it away." Let me put it this way. I'll go back to the metaphor about being a guide on a path. It's the difference between walking through a forest, taking a journey, and standing on a mountaintop surveying the landscape. If you can see it all at once, it's not actually a story. You need to control the release of information. Never tell your readers anything they don't have to know. And that includes, I'm sad to say, detailed descriptions of the environment, or the weather, or all the things that people often seem to feel are important for atmosphere, local color, that kind of thing. Mention the weather if the weather is relevant to the story. If you just want to have it raining for no reason and it doesn't affect what anyone is going to do, leave it out. Just leave it out. My last slogan is say less. As a general rule, if you say less, if you leave more to your readers and your editors' imaginations, they'll become more invested. It's kind of like the way people get invested in watching your protagonist when they're working hard, they're struggling to achieve something. People also get invested when the story that you're telling them asks them to participate more, gives them, clues but not pictures. So the last bit of my give the magic room to work is never underestimate the power of a well-chosen detail. And by a well-chosen detail, I mean one, maybe two. I remember reading a John D. MacDonald novel when I was a kid, where he managed to sum up the whole kind of vibe of this scummy motel his protagonist had checked into by talking about a crack in the plaster on one wall with a water stain that followed it down like a map of the Mississippi from Wisconsin to Kentucky. Now, I'm from Illinois, so of course I knew exactly what he was talking about. But the point is that captures there's mold, there's leaks, it's a scummy place. He doesn't need to talk about all of the scummy details. If you got one good scummy detail, the rest of the room creates itself, the rest of the environment generally creates itself in your reader's imagination. And I think that brings us basically to the end of my prepared remarks. And I'm happy to take questions, if there are any.
Yeah, we've got one that came in from James Wickison. I'll read it out for you. It says, Hi, huge fan of Matt and great to hear him discuss the process of writing. I'm dialed in for the UK and about to drop for kids' bedtime, and I'm not sure if he's still here. It looks like he's left, but that's okay. He'll catch the video. But he wanted to ask how you see storytelling change for nonlinear media, like RPGs, computer games, etc. Is it still possible to tell stories the same way, or do they need to be more event-driven?
Wow, that's kind of a big question. I actually the last volume of my Acts of Cain is in fact a nonlinear narrative, not really inspired by RPGs and games and stuff, but it would be possible to regard the story as snippets from several different playthroughs of the same RPG, like a computer game. I don't know. I think that there will always be a place for traditional narrative. There was a writer I was fond of back in college. I think his name was John Brain. And he said, he was talking about, this was an essay from the 60s, talking about experimental fiction. And he said that the only reason to write experimental fiction is if you come up with a story that you can't tell in a traditional fashion. This is why I think that traditional storytelling, there will always be a place for it. I think that some video games have extraordinary levels of storytelling artistry. I'm not a big gamer myself, but I'm acquainted with a number of people who are, and I think it's fabulous. I think it's a very interesting, it's an interesting technical challenge, I would say, as a writer. I have not attempted to write a video game myself. I have worked on a novelization of one, but that didn't turn out well for me. So I guess if I'm understanding the question correctly, I think that there will always be a place for linear storytelling, but what video games and things like that do is sort of expand the universe of potential stories. There are some stories that I think might actually be better as a video game than as a novel. I can't I can't come up with a specific example, because like I said, I'm not that big of a gamer, but conceptually I can certainly understand how there are things that you can do in a game that you can't do in a book, and maybe not so much vice versa. This is something I'd have to think about it. I may give that some thought, and if I have anything useful to say about it, I'll put it up on my Twitter feed.
Thank you. And I'm going to take this moment to remind anyone watching on Facebook that if you'd like to submit a question, just do so in the comments and I'll read that out. So here on Zoom, I've got a question from Stuart, who asks, have you written non-commercial fiction? If so, is your process similar?
I have not. My objective was always to be read. So let me put it this way. I have a lot of artistic ambitions as a writer. I think of myself as a commercial novelist with artistic sensibilities. I have themes that I often return to. I have some personal convictions on the nature of reality, human psychology, and social organization that I firmly believe in, that inform my work. But before I started selling books, I tried a lot of different things to try and break into print. And what finally worked for me is some of these principles that I was talking about today finally induced an editor to say, oh yeah, well, we'll give you money for this. So yes and no. I mean, my fiction is not purely commercial. It's very personal to me, and generally reflects deeply held views about reality and etc. So yeah, I honestly I tried, especially when I was in college, because some of my my writing coaches and teachers were relatively prominent literary types. Yeah, I spent years trying to write like Raymond Carver. And eventually I discovered that I'm not Raymond Carver, and I just need to write like me. And this is kind of the strategy that I use.
Great. I've got another question here from Taylor, And she asks, with writing commercial fiction, how much attention do you have to pay to what the plan of the showrunner is outside of what has already been published?
Oh, well, that's an interesting thing, because about half of my career was spent on tie-in novels, and I was very fortunate in my work for Star Wars to have people like Abel Pena, whose job it was at the time to manage the continuity. Basically, I think that's what Taylor is asking. Is there were people whose job it was to make sure that I didn't do anything. I didn't submit anything to them or let them publish anything that would interfere with any of their longer term plans. My first book for Star Wars is actually volume 13 in a 20 book series. It was all one big long story. So yes, there is a lot less, there's a lot less room for artistic interpretation, I would say, when you're working on a licensed property. But it doesn't mean that you can't write a good book. It doesn't mean even that you can't write a book that people respond to at a deeper than purely superficial entertainment level. It's just tricky. That's all. Yes, the showrunner's plans, or in this case, in the Lucasfilm books, Lucas Books management. Yes, their will is law. On the other hand, they are interested in producing good fiction that is going to reflect creditably on their franchise. So sometimes, and I've had this experience as well, sometimes when they say no, I say, well, okay, exactly what is it exactly you're saying no to? What if I did this? Or what if I, went around that particular corner? And sometimes they say yes. Sometimes they say, ooh, that's a good idea. And that's not going to screw up anything that we have planned in the future. And they let you go with it.
I'm going to use this as a segue to promote a book of yours, which is not coming up very well. It's an anthology. I got to turn off my background or else it's not going to show. Sorry here.
Yeah, it's too dark. I think
it is too dark. So I'm very sorry. But point is that we have a book available that features one of your short stories, Kind of Burst Away. Great art, by the way. And that's part of our special giveaway. We have new cards available. If you can see it, has little Baby Yoda on it. So if you renew your card or get a new library card or just upgrade your current one to this version of a card, then you'll be entered into a drawing for either this book or another, or a whole host of different Star Wars prizes. And that's part of our September library card sign-up month.
Oh, and if it makes any difference, I am going to get down there and actually sign that book.
Fantastic. Love to hear that. Okay, I've still got more questions. Here we go. One from Facebook this time, from Amy. She writes, how long does it take you to write a novel and then to get it published?
Well, the fastest I ever wrote a novel was 7 months. That was that Star Wars book that I mentioned earlier. that was also the last one of my books that I turned in by its official deadline. It generally takes me about a year. Heroes Die took me 10 months, but it was a rewrite of something that I had already written and failed to sell. Blade of Taishal took 3 years. Most of my other books seem to take about a year for me, but most of the time that I was working on these, I was also maintaining a full-time job, so I was not writing full-time, but writing 2 or 3 hours a day, and then going to work for money and health insurance. There are people I know, people whose books I admire, who can write a novel in 3 or 4 weeks. I'm not one of those people.
No, I can't imagine being one of those people either. Let's see, question from Ryan on Zoom. How do you deal with character agency with characters who by all rights should not have much, or where the lack of agency is a key point? A child in the early sections of a Bildungsroman like Gormenghast, or someone like Joseph K. in The Trial?
Well, The Trial, I feel compelled to point out, I'm fairly certain was not published during Kafka's lifetime. I'm not sure that it qualifies. I'm not sure it really fits the mold of commercial fiction. But even a child with what we would consider as adults lack of agency, still has their own goals and ambitions, even if their only goal is to be Huck Finn and skip out from school and go play in the creek. They still have, there are things that they can aspire to, that they can want to do, and you can show them struggling to get to whatever goals they have that are, whatever it is they want, whether they're 5 or 8 or 15 or whatever. I think that if your character has a lack of agency, you probably should rethink your character, because agency, I mean, it doesn't have to be world-changing agency like my characters often have. I'm thinking of Stephen King's legendary novella, The Body, made into the film Stand By Me, which is just about 4 11-year-olds decide they really want to go see a dead body, and it's their journey to get there is the story. I don't think any of them really suffer from lack of agency, and they all have kind of their own reasons for wanting to do this. And I don't know. I think that it is possible to recast a story to give your character agency at any age. What's the I can't remember. There's a famous story about a guy who Butterfly and the Diving Bell. I can't remember now. About a guy who is completely paralyzed and can only like move one eyelid, something like that. I don't actually remember, but I remember it being very well received when it came out. I'm trying to meditate on the concept of characters, protagonists who lack agency. The only other one that springs to mind is the title character the main character of Johnny Got His Gun, who, if I recall correctly, is basically suffering from like lock-in syndrome. Deaf, blind, can't move. Again, this is something I read 45 years ago, so I don't remember clearly, but I seem to recall that even he has some agency in kind of diving into his own thoughts and memories and stuff like that. So I think that generally speaking, it is possible to recast a story, no matter how helpless your protagonist appears to be. If you choose a helpless protagonist, you need to give them goals that they can try to achieve. And even if the goal is to communicate somehow with the outside world, if that's all they can hope for, if that's the best they can hope for, that's still something that they can work to achieve.
Okay, thank you. Well, we've just about made our hour, and I don't seem to have any questions waiting, so I think maybe, oh, I spoke too soon. Amy has a follow-up. She says, how do you keep track of all the aspects of your novel? For example, do you keep index cards of each scene and place them on a timeline and move them around?
No. I personally have kind of a strange memory that sort of keeps stories organized in my head. I do a lot of cutting, pasting, moving things around, but it's generally when the book is in progress. Something like what you're talking about, index cards, things like that, can be very useful in the early stages of outlining, because you want to be sure that you're not losing track of any important plot threads or introducing characters and then having them just not show up later on and stuff like that. That kind of thing can be very useful. Instead of index cards, I generally have very, very long single-spaced computer files of notes, basically just a record of my thoughts on the subject. And I go back and consult them from time to time, but that is about as far as I go. I know writers who chart timelines, put them on the wall, and have different colored markers for each character so that they can see where the characters are going to cross paths and in what scene and stuff like that. But that's just that's too complicated for me. That's over my head.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Matthew. And I learned a lot today.
Oh, that's nice. I hope that everyone who managed to make it through my stammering found at least something that is going to help them move forward in their writing ambitions.
All right. Well, fantastic. And thank you everyone for coming in today.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your patience and your time and attention.